Hi, it's Jason Gorber from thatshelf.com. We're going to do something a little bit weird here. We're going to celebrate Star Wars on a home video. There's been decades that I've been collecting versions of Star Wars. It's really the way that most of my generation completely fell in love with the film. Look, kids of these days are used to being able to get anything, anywhere, at any time. But back in 1977, you saw the film, and then you basically had the toys, and you sort of reimagined what the actual film was. You had in your head what it was, this thing that you remembered. Again, I was 5 when it came out, and so things got a little bit hazy after a while. But it's funny, every time I would see the film, I would get not only something more out of it as I was growing, and I was getting more of the thematic elements sort of coming to the fore, but it would also be an opportunity to actually sort of delve into more deeply my own memories of it and recognize sometimes how wrong I was about what I was remembering about a particular thing or character. Confusing sort of, it's like when you confuse dream with reality. It's when you confuse you playing with your figures with what's actually transpiring on screen. So there's lots of different versions. We've had innumerable formats that have been available for home. There was 8mm sort of short versions that you could actually buy. We never had a projector like that. Little 16mm. I know people own 35 prints of the originals. And again, there's a whole nother video to make about what counts as the original, especially when it comes to something like Star Wars, where even in the first month of release, I think there was 4 different sound mixes that took place. To say that films escape and are never sort of modified again, certainly Star Wars is an excellent example of where that is not the case. Anyway, really my home media format was a format that not many people know about. It's actually called CED. This is a CED disc. Here's Star Wars. I have Empire Strikes Back. Return of the Jedi actually came on 2 discs. And believe it or not, this is the format that I grew up with before VHS. You would go to the library and actually get a player, and the mechanism actually slides in, goes through, and you're sort of good to go from there. If I open this without it taking too much time, you can actually see the magic of what this format is. It's obviously an analog video format, and it's a pain to release if you don't have the mechanism to do it. That is a vinyl record. So you would actually have inside basically a stylus, a needle, that would be writing and actually producing video images if you had the right machine. I do not have a CD machine, but I do have the actual 2 of the discs for 2 of the films. Now, these would have been edited down to actually fit on these discs. I don't know how many minutes less that it is, but nonetheless, this was the way it would see it. You'd have a birthday party, you'd rent the player from the library, stick it in, and this was the way that you would actually play the films. And for years, this is how I saw it. Before we even had a VHS player, this was the way to see Star Wars. After that, there was obviously numerous VHS releases of Star Wars. I have a pile here. If you look at, these are actual rental copies of CBS Fox home video releases, Return of the Jedi and Empire Strikes Back again. These I was just given by somebody who was getting rid of them. You can see this still the rental thing. Back in the day when you would go to video stores and actually rent VHS, this is what you would do. But for me, the biggest deal when it came out, and actually something that changed not only the way that I view Star Wars, but the way I view all films, was the recognition that the way I'd been watching it all this time in pan and scan wasn't the way that it was actually meant to be. This box here, this with a nice little hologram, this was the first VHS set, including a making of. Lovely little box, comes with a bunch of posters and a little book and stuff. But this here was the first widescreen versions that I saw when I was old enough to understand what the heck widescreen was. And I remember it was this strangely transcendent experience of seeing these things where I'd basically seen a third of the film. And then suddenly there was a composition. I remember distinctly the one with the Tusken Raiders, the Sand Troopers, sort of there with a rifle. And you could see in the background the land speeder go, this little tiny Puchka model go through. And I thought, oh my God, I have not been seeing a huge chunk of this film the whole time. It was a grand revelation. It doesn't take much. I mean, again, we totally take for granted the way that actually widescreen works, but this was the one that was that important to me. This was never actually my original Laserdisc, and we'll get into the whole Laserdisc set in a moment, but this would have come out at the same time as those sort of middling pan and scan VHS versions came along. I'll open up a Laserdisc for those that aren't aware about this technology, but I had heard about this stuff. But this wasn't really what got me into this format. That would be this big guy. So people have probably heard of this. This is the definitive edition. This is, quote unquote, the original versions, the non-special edition versions of Star Wars on Laserdisc. Potentially the best format, at least in terms of audio, that we're ever going to get on home media, especially as it looks more and more increasingly likely that we're simply never going to get the original cuts other than the bootlegs. That's a whole nother conversation as well. This version, I first dreamed about when it came out. And Lizard, again, I had switched obviously to VHS. There was all kinds of VHS going on at the time. But Laserdisc was sort of like somebody who owned a Ferrari. Like the people, like the cinephile of cinephiles would have Laserdisc. And it just seemed to me insane, something that was completely untenable for me to ever own. I actually bought this. This is the last copy that was being sold from HMV in downtown Toronto, 333 Yonge. And I got it, I think it was $300 back in the mid-90s. This is what a Laserdisc looked like. Now let's step back a little bit. In the early 1980s, before I even saw CDs, we did a school trip to some science fair or wherever it was. I don't even remember where we went. But I remember somebody pulled this out and I thought, this is the future. This is literally when you see stuff in your kid and you like spaceships and Jetsons vehicles and we're all going to have robots and flying cars. I saw this. I'm like, oh my God, it's a record, but it looks like a hologram. This is incredible. This 12-inch disc. This is a CAV, which means it's only half hour per side. So it flips. If you have a player, it actually, the mechanism works. There's, again, many videos to do on the technology of Laserdisc. But nonetheless, this was the dream. This was literally considered the definitive version of Star Wars. It had audio commentary from some of the filmmakers that actually contributed. People like John Ralston and Dennis Muren contributed interviews only available here. I was in Sweden in the mid-90s, staying at a friend Anders's house, and he owned this. I mean, he was the only person that I knew crazy. Now, in fairness, this guy also owns a DeLorean, so he's that kind of guy that just has stuff. And I was staying over at his place, actually, his parents at the time, and they had a Laserdisc player, and they had this. I thought I'm never going to have an opportunity, so I sort of got up in the middle of the night and just went through as much of it as I could. I was just gorging on the content of this, thinking I would never have an opportunity to do it again. When I came back, my first DVD player was actually a DVD Laserdisc hybrid. And I was spending a lot of time, while I was at grad school, I should have been working a lot of time, basically buying out video stores of their Laserdiscs as they were getting rid of. It's how I ended up with like a couple hundred Laserdiscs. But this one actually bought sort of at the end of the road, when this came out, again, as the big set. Obviously, as I said, these are the 1977, 80, and 83 versions of the films. It came with a giant hardcover book, a beautiful book. I'll try not to ruin this as I put it back in here. Came with the Lucas Creative Impulse book. This is what you would get back in the day when you actually would buy large box sets. And a bunch of other elements. Now, in terms of the quality, again, you can get super nerdy about what it was. The master for this is a non-anamorphic D1. Which will show up in a moment. But the deal with that was that if you show it on a 4:3 screen, it was properly letterbox. If you show it on a modern 16:9 television, it's actually a window box. So the image is 4:3 with bars on the side. So if you see it on a modern 16:9 TV, you basically have in the middle a widescreen image with black bars on the sides and black bars on the top. If you zoom in, obviously the image deteriorates even further. But that's about it. That's about, in terms of what we have readily available, that definitive edition and the D1 Master, which was put on another release, is about all we've got for that version. Now, of course, I was crazy. So when the special editions came out post-97, I pre-ordered from HMV. That's $170.99. And this was the special editions available, again, on Laserdisc. I had bought the player for the definitive edition, had collected many more discs than them. And then when this came out, I pre-ordered from HMV. And out of a sense of shame, I sort of left the sticker on here. There are a bunch of other Laserdiscs that sort of played a role. Obviously, I showed you the 20th Century Fox, the original Fox Video one. Here's a Fox video of Return of the Jedi. But this was a big one. This is a very rare disc, actually. The Japanese release of Phantom Menace. Now, we can, again, go on about my lunacy of seeing Phantom Menace some 56 times in theaters, 8 times on opening day. But nonetheless, I actually dig this film. I really do. And to buy it this way, this is weirdly the only way you can get the theatrical version of this. Because once again, after this, Lucas actually foots with it even further. Obviously, the Yoda's different, but the podcast edit, all of that elements, this is the best, essentially, theatrical version that you can get. It was available on VHS, and it was available on Laserdisc. This does have Japanese subtitles. It is window box, but sound-wise, Laserdisc was always spectacular. And the Dolby Digital mix on this is fantastic. Much better, actually, than the DVD. Now that we have Blu-ray and 4K, things are a little bit different. But this DVD, the Dolby Digital THX certified version of this mix is actually quite beautiful. I used to actually test with a friend, Chad, my subwoofer, using this. We'd just unplug all the other speakers, play the pod race, and see how that also worked out. Now, another very rare Laserdisc that we have that I actually purchased, this is the making of Star Wars, as told by C-3PO and R2-D2, and SPFX, The Empire Strikes Back. Come to think about it, I really should have had Anthony Daniels sign this. Nonetheless, here is 2 making ofs, which are actually relatively hard to find originals of. Obviously, this kind of stuff shows up on YouTube and stuff like that, and then keeps getting taken down. But this was a pretty rare release. Again, I believe out of Japan. God bless the Japanese, who actually were even more obsessive about this stuff than I am. Now, again, to tie it with Phantom Menace, this was the Phantom Menace box set that came out around the same time as the Laserdisc. Importing Laserdisc from Japan was one thing. It came with a lovely book. Comes with a couple frames. This one is an actual 35 frame. It seems that I have Anakin and his mom. And this, I got a Darth Maul going through. And then we have just simply a normal VHS videotape that everybody's familiar with, or at least most people should be familiar with, and a couple cards. So a nice little box, nothing particularly spectacular, but again, I was given this after the fact. I didn't actually buy this at the original time, but somebody, when they're purging their Star Wars stuff, I tend to collect it. Now, back to VHS nonsense. When the actual releases came out, we got super excited about what we were actually seeing with all the widescreen, all these elements. Phantom Menace coming out. Then, obviously, the original Star Wars trilogy came out on the first format, which was DVD. There were multiple versions on DVD. I had many of them, but the one that's probably most interesting is this one. It's in a tin case, and this version, the limited edition version of this on DVD, has the original 1977 version. So this on DVD has an extra disc, the bonus disc, which is the original New Hope, which is the same as the Laserdisc. It's the same D1 master. So it's a non-anamorphic presentation of the quote-unquote original 1977, 80, and 83 versions. Even the title screen does not say A New Hope. It's the original Star Wars crawl and then the original presentation as it went. So this is actually sort of a much more convenient way of playing the Laserdisc equivalent if you don't want to actually pull out a Laserdisc player, you don't have access to it. There's obviously other Star Wars elements. This is the equivalent here. So I have it in an older Star Wars trilogy box. I got rid of those DVDs, but I'm keeping my episode 1, 2, and 3 inside this box. This box was replaced by the tin, but I did keep the bonus material of that Star Wars trilogy. You then have all kinds of other weird things. I could go on and on and on, but the ancillary things like Ewoks, I have the Robot Chicken discs, we have all kinds of that nonsense. But eventually, when it came to Star Wars, we would end up with stuff in high definition. Now, the first way that I actually had it on high definition was off HBO broadcasts, which again were non-remastered but interesting versions that actually looked pretty clean of the films in 1920 by 1080. And that is what these are. Those are not familiar These are bootlegs, of course, because this was never officially released. But these are HD DVD bootlegs of the HBO broadcasts of the first 6 films in the sextilogy, as it were. The first 6 films of Star Wars, the Lucas films of the Skywalker saga. Now, these look good. They're not amazing, but they certainly look better than Blu-ray in many ways. And again, different cuts, different iterations. And so this did a reasonably okay job of printing labels and doing the like. But nonetheless, just to have this as a sort of bootleg version of this spirit of it to play on another dead format, as it were, is a fun thing to have. When it came to the actual original Blu-ray release, that's this. This is that complete saga, back when this was the complete saga. A lovely box, actually. Hardcover book with each version of the film. And this came with some spectacular making of documentaries, uncut. A lot of this is available on Disney Plus now. That's a whole other thing with streaming. But a bunch of it's actually either cut down or censored. So this is the way to actually have the original. And you're going to find out more and more with home media releases. It's amazing we have access to basically everything. But here we are actually able to have in our own home without incurring data charges, but actually have it in the way that it was sort of originally released. You then get into the crazy nonsense of the postquels, as I call them, episodes 7, 8, and 9. And there's obviously a number of versions of that. When JJ's Force Awakens came out, this is the original Blu-ray. But this is the collector's edition, which did 2 things. One, it provided actually substantially more in the way of extras and actual supplementary materials, which actually did, for me, make the film a little bit better, frankly. This did a nice job. But again, for this lunatic, the big deal is that this is the only way you could get the 3D version of the film. For those of us that actually really like 3D and have equipment at home to be able to present 3D in extraordinary ways. I have a 65-inch OLED, the last of the LG OLEDs that actually did 3D. This is the preferred way to see this film, absolutely. It's beautiful 3D. The stereoscopy is fantastic for the 3 Star Wars films, and frankly, for many epic films. I think 3D got such a bad rap by people who did it poorly. It's like complaining that we should never have had sound in films because some of the early sound films were pretty miserable in terms of audio fidelity. The fact of the matter is, when done well, 3D can be quite extraordinary. And unfortunately, TV manufacturers chased a whole lot of other features which are quite useless, things like motion interpolation, instead of actually focusing on perfecting this extra dimensionality, which really is quite effective, especially in this kind of immersive cinema. And so, again, whole nother conversation to have, but this was the way in North America that you could actually still get The Force Awakens. This is the last time you could do that for a Star Wars film. Fact of the matter is that only in UK are they still releasing the films on 3D, and I've actually been waiting for months now for my version of The Rise of Skywalker to show up in 3D, so we're still fingers crossed on that. If you look at The Last Jedi, we have the 3D version, which again, imported from UK, which actually allowed me to do it that way. And for the first time on release, they had the 4K Ultra HD. So if you look at it, we've gone from basically VHS, which is, VHS quality, to Laserdisc, all the way to DVD, 720, to the 720 HD of the HD DVD, to the 1080p of Blu-ray, right to 4K. The disc, Last Jedi actually looks quite stunning in 4K. It's the cinematography obviously is quite beautiful. For those that don't love the film, there's nothing I can help with you. As somebody who actually really loves Star Wars, I think this is a film that really loves Star Wars. It's as simple as that. And I think it's a quite elegant presentation of this. And yet, the one for me that actually I'm more interested in is frankly the 3D version. So between these two, if I'm just watching it as a standalone, this was always the way I would watch it, and then the 3D version. And finally, you have the in-between films, things like Solo, which I have somewhere, and you have stuff like Rogue One. Beautiful versions. I actually really, really love Rogue One, with this gorgeous book presentation, and again, the only way that you could actually get the 3D version. This was released in North America and allowed me to pick it up. But for the sort of standalone films and a bunch of the new Disney stuff, Again, I'm having to import from Europe, which is costing a fortune. I'll wait and put that back another time. Which brings us to The Rise of Skywalker. This is the new 4K release. Again, people are like, why would you have this instead of just watching on Disney Plus? Well, a couple reasons. First of all, the presentation of this really is better. It's not just statistically better, but if you look at the way that 4K streaming works with Disney Plus, it's running about 10 to 15 megabits per second. This is anywhere from 50 to 100. What does that mean? Sometimes when there's a lot of motion, a lot of stuff going on, this simply looks significantly better as long as you have a properly tuned television. You're actually attuned to what you're actually seeing. Most people are going to say, hey, this looks pretty. A lot of people look at a DVD and say, hey, this looks pretty. If you're chasing that sort of last mile of making sure that your video quality is as good as it can be, the 4K really is quite stunning. The sound is amazing. Obviously, it's mixed in Atmos, which is quite beautiful. And that's the way to go. Which brings to the sort of what we're doing here for making this whole video. Here's this whole pile. And what are we actually led up to actually dealing with? The Skywalker saga. The Skywalker saga. So this just came. I actually had to order this from the States. It's a long story. These have been released individually as discs, and I could have bought them that way, but I'm a sucker for a box. What can I say? And a collectible book. So I've yet to open this. This was released Best Buy Canada, and I had an order in, and something happened, and it didn't work out. So I was forced to order it from Best Buy in the States. Best Buy in the States doesn't ship to Canada. I had to ship it to a friend in Seattle. They graciously shipped it to me here. Cost me a fortune. But if you look at all this nonsense, you're like, well, whatever. It's Star Wars. You just keep giving money for that. So this is not something I'm particularly happy to have been forced to purchase in US dollars, paying US shipping and then Canadian GST on top of. But nonetheless, I'm very excited to see this. This is episodes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. It does not include the auxiliary releases, as it were, things like Rogue One and Solo. I didn't even bring up Solo. Solo I have in 4K and 3D. Solo is Solo. But nonetheless, this I'm actually quite excited about, and I'm about to open it here. We'll do a little bit of an unboxing. So as I take the plastic off, and let my poor cat deal with it, it comes with these cardboard sticky things that I'm actually a big sucker for. You can see that the Death Star opens up. Let's get this out here carefully. Ooh, it opens that way. So it actually doesn't unlock. That's kind of fun. And then I pop out carefully. Let's just put this down. You can see the awkwardness of this all. There we go. So the slide of the box is such that it actually permanently attached, so it actually doesn't slide off the side of the box. It's quite nice. There's on the back a bunch of information, some Best Buy branding, the usual, but again, a version of the Death Star from episode 4, or Star Wars as it'll always be now. You have the book, the Skywalker Saga, on the back, the Lucasfilm logo, which was initiated, I believe, for Phantom Menace, and inside, beautiful storybook. Long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. A Doug Chiang painting of the Naboo starfighter. Beautiful. Doug Chiang. Okay. Ryan Church illustration. I'm correct about that. From episode 2, the crawler. So a bunch of concept art and the discs attached here. Eric Tiemann's doing some concept art from episode 3. That has to be Ralph McQuarrie. It is an original painting from the Falcon. More Ralph McQuarrie. Again, Ralph McQuarrie, beautiful painting, the concept painter. Extraordinary. If you've not delved into his art, it's really, really fantastic. Now we get into the postals, as it were, whose names I don't know quite as well. Andre Wallen did this painting from episode 7. This is Seth Engstrom with a painting from episode 8. Rise of Skywalker, art by Andre Wallen and Stephen Tappan. Looks very much like taking a bunch of stills and doing it, and we just lost some paper. And some making of background, including some Anthony Daniels from the Attack of the Clones background. There we are, a beautiful black and white shot of Phil Tippett with some AT-ATs. George in front of the Death Star 2 model. Force Awakens background scenes, Ryan in the cockpit. There's JJ and our man Adam Driver getting ready to shoot some stuff, and some fun banter between John Boyega and Oscar Isaac, and then finally some stars. And the thing that fell is a little note from our friend Mark Hamill. What an extraordinary journey it's been. No doubt it's an extraordinary journey, no more so than for Mr. Hamill, who clearly has a lot of fun on Twitter doing this, and of course the digital code. If somebody's close enough to actually zoom and get the digital code, go nuts. But nonetheless, there we are, a giant collection of all this stuff. I look forward to actually watching these in whatever I choose to watch them. I don't know whether or not these will be the go-to, especially for 7, 8, 9, given the fact that I do prefer to watch them in 3D. But it's getting increasingly problematic for me to actually find a television to watch them on. Something goes with my television, I will at least have another collection that I can add to this nonsense, that I'll always have to have a version that I can actually play this on. So there we are, the Skywalker Saga, the 9-disc set in 4K UHD. The discs I should show just for fun, because who knows how it actually plays out. The artwork, exactly as you'd expect. And it's actually quite nice when you pull it out on the tab. It actually shows here which disc actually goes. The artwork's actually down there. So it looks like a quite lovely layout. I could have bought them as individual discs, but obviously this is the way to go. So there we are. Thank you so much for watching. Unboxings are a little bit weird. It's sort of like the worst kind of show and tell. It's like, hey, look at all the stuff I have. But nonetheless, I hope that it sort of shows the sort of variety of formats and all the other elements that actually come together to actually have a little bit of this galaxy at home. It really, Star Wars in so many ways changed cinema in many fundamental ways. It changed the way that it looks, the way it sounds, the way it's consumed, not only in terms of its merchandising, but also in terms of how it worked in terms of home video. Increasingly more and more generations as they go along don't give a damn about this stuff. They like the convenience. They like being able to do it on Disney Plus. People don't have a lot of room, don't have a lot of stuff on that shelf to actually put up. Nonetheless, for those of us that actually have that collecting bug, that sort of obsession, but also prefer to have it the best way we can possibly get, home media is still the way to go. So I'd like to thank very much Disney for actually continuing this tradition of putting it on. Please take my money. Please find a way to actually get us. We know that the 4K scans of the original were actually done. There must be a way to actually get us a conformed version at some point in time. I know they're not in a particular rush to do that, but it would be for simply historical reasons to actually have the original, as close to the original 77, 80, and 83 version that we could get. That would be fantastic. But nonetheless, if you look at something like even A New Hope, if you add all these up, there's probably 7 versions of the original 1977 Star Wars or A New Hope. Different iterations, different ways that Lucas actually played with it. It's quite ridiculous, but nonetheless, this is what you get when you actually care about sort of film history, and also this movie, which has taken on a life which is much more obviously than a movie for me and many other people. It's sort of this weird position that you're at when you're in a film critic. I can look at these films as films. I can certainly find elements that are both positive and negative. On the other hand, they've been such an integral part, not only of my childhood, my adulthood, but also just the way that I view cinema in general. And what better way to celebrate that yet with another version. For ThatShelf.com, I'm Jason Gorber. Thank you so much for watching. If you could subscribe, it would really help us a lot. Follow us on social media, and we'd really appreciate to hear from you. Let us know in the comments what your favorite version is. Let us know if there's other videos that you would like to see in the series, and we'll see you next time. All the best.